OpenAI announced a bunch of new models and tools for us to play with today. The most interesting one being O3. Now, O3 has been around for a while in its mini version, but they released the full version of O3, which is their smartest and most capable reasoning model. And what's cool about O3 is that we have seen reasoning models before, and in my opinion, Gemini 2.5 Pro is the best reasoning model out there. But O3 does a couple of things that Gemini doesn't, and it is more agentic than Gemini. So it reasons and it can use tools, but it can reason and use tools at the same time in multiple steps. And I'm gonna demonstrate what that is and how that works. But I'll show you a few experiments I did with O3 and the same experiments in Gemini in this video, and we'll compare the responses and the results. And I'll show you why O3's reasoning plus agentic behavior is really good in certain use cases. So I asked ChatGPT and Gemini the same question. I asked, what are people saying about ChatGPT O3, and find everything you can about it and some of the interesting things that it can do. And ChatGPT thought for a bunch for like a minute and 7 seconds. And it kind of like first tried to understand what I was looking for. It made a bunch of searches. And as it got back results, it reasoned about the results and made more searches. So this is the big kind of difference between how reasoning models have behaved in the past and how this new agentic reasoning model O3 is behaving, right? It does a search, it gets a response back, and it doesn't just combine the responses into an answer like previously and give it to you. It thinks about the answer and it continues to do more searches. So you can see multiple steps here of reasoning, searching the web, reasoning, searching the web. And the reason it's doing is because it kind of wants to give me a well-rounded answer and collect various feedback from different sources. And if it's missing some sort of feedback, it's trying to search for more of that feedback where it feels like it's missing, right? And so it keeps going back and forth, searching the web, getting more answers, searching the web, getting more answers. And it's trying to find everything it can and some of the interesting things that it can do. And finally, it gives me a full answer of like, what is O3? What are people saying about it? And what are some of the interesting things it can do? Now, if we go on to Gemini, Gemini also does some reasoning, right? Because it is a reasoning model. But the difference here is it reasons initially, it comes up with a bunch of searches, 4 different searches, and then it runs those searches in parallel. And when it's done with the searches, it takes all the answers back and then turns that into one answer. So it's not reasoning about the answers that come back. It's not thinking through the answers that come back to see whether it is solved or fully answered my initial question. It is reasoning initially, making searches and then using search tools, and then coming back with an answer for me. And the reason this doesn't work, as you can see here, is it gets answers about O3, but initially on, it didn't really know what O3 was. And so it made some assumptions that I might be talking about GPT-3 or GPT-4o. And because it didn't know what O3 was, it just looked for interesting things that ChatGPT can do, which is ChatGPT in general. So the answer it comes back to me with is initially about O3, but the interesting things it can do is a more generic answer about what ChatGPT can do in general and not specifically O3. So it doesn't quite solve my question because it did not think through the answer that it got back and continue. And so that kind of highlights the reasoning tool use method of O3 and why it's better in kind of like this sort of research area. Now, this is kind of actually how deep research works. So in all of these tools, in all models, OpenAI, Gemini, Grok, and even now Claude, there is a deep research feature, which is basically an agent that does research, finds answers, continues to research, and digs through everything. So it's interesting that O3 now natively does this. Like the O3 search is basically a basic version of deep research, and it's specifically aligned to your query. Now, search isn't the only tool that the reasoning model O3 has. It can also work with images and work with Python. So here's a really cool example. I was kind of surprised by this example. So I gave it this picture of me sitting in front of what looks like a Japanese background, and I thought I might trip it up, and I asked it, where was the picture taken? And it thought for 19 seconds and gave me Japan Pavilion, Epcot, which is the correct answer. It was taken in Walt Disney World, Epcot. And I asked it, how do you know? And so it had analyzed the picture and it got the visual cues, the pagoda, which is up on the right here, the torii, and then interestingly enough, it noticed the geodesic sphere in the distance in the background, the spaceship Earth, which is the biggest landmark at Epcot. And I didn't realize this. I didn't even notice this myself, but yeah, there it is right at the back. It's very small, but it's right there. And O3 picked it up. So I was like, can you point it out to me? And it comes back with a picture with a red circle around that. And I was like, wow, how did it do that? So I looked through the chain of thought thinking here. And so it first uses Python to analyze it, right? It realizes it's sideways, so it has to rotate it. Then it kind of plots the distance of the sphere from the edge. Then it puts a circle where it has plotted that distance. It gets it wrong. And then it sort of like makes adjustments and finally gets it right and then sends it back to me, right? So that's really interesting, right? Because it's like, again, you can see the reasoning, using a tool, getting an answer back, reasoning, and sort of this loop that it goes through until it reaches the final answer and answers my query. And then I said, can you zoom in for me? And it actually just like blows up the picture and zooms right into that thing, right? So really cool how it can work with multiple tools, manipulate images and give it back. And if we go over to Gemini right now, we'll see that I've asked the same question, same image. And by the way, I've removed all the metadata from this image, but Gemini again gets it right. It does get the Japan Pavilion at Epcot, but I asked it to tell me how it identified it, and it identifies the pagoda and the torii, but it did not identify the geodesic sphere. And so I asked it if it can point out the torii gate for me, and it can describe it, but it can't circle the image and give me back an image. So it can't give you back an image. It can work with images, but it can't generate the image through this, right? And so that's another kind of advantage that O3 has over Gemini 2.5 Pro. As it can work with images and give you back the image as well. I also wanted to test out the coding abilities of both O3 and Gemini 2.5 and compare them. I use Gemini 2.5 Pro a lot for coding because it is the best reasoning model out there. But OpenAI claims that O3 is really good at coding as well because it's a really good reasoning model. So I asked it to create a simple app where I click a button and I'm able to converse with the voice AI agent and get a transcript back at the end of it. And the reason I asked this specific question is A, obviously test the coding and reasoning, but B, voice AI agents and some of the newer libraries and SDKs are beyond the cutoff date for these models. So I wanted to see how it would do with getting newer libraries and SDKs and implementing that as code. Because sometimes, when I'm building projects, oftentimes these agents will use older library versions or older code, and it might break something. And so you always want to have the latest documentation, latest code in there. And instead of having to copy and paste all the latest stuff, if it can just figure it out on its own, go research that, find it and do it for you, that's amazing. So O3 does actually do that. O3 kind of does a search for the latest speech and voice APIs. And it then comes back to me with answers. And there's two answers. There is one using the kind of real-time API that OpenAI has, which is you directly talk to a voice model. And then the second answer is the sort of a classic version where your speech gets converted into text. That text gets fed into a model. The model responds with text, and then the text is converted back to speech. That's kind of like last year's method, and this year's method is the real-time API. So O3 comes back with the more modern method and describes that first, and then says, as an alternative, I can use last year's method. And so then I actually ask it to write the code, and it does that. I haven't tested out the code yet, but just by looking at it, it generated it in a canvas, and it kind of looks fine. I'm going to show you what Gemini. So here in Gemini, it does reason again, but it doesn't do any search because it kind of just uses what's in its memory, which is last year's methods of implementing voice AI, which is the speech to text AI model, text to speech. And so it gives me that answer. It doesn't look up anything new. Doesn't look up the real-time API. it kind of just gives me that answers and says I can either just like implement it in the browser and use existing browser speech APIs, or I can like build out like kind of a front end, back end, and kind of set up the Google Cloud, AWS, and so on. And interestingly, obviously, like it's going to recommend Google APIs, whereas OpenAI recommends their own APIs. But you can see that it's giving me a more classic version, and it kind of like, this is last year's version, which, you know, if I was developing this as an app, I probably wouldn't use, because I want to use more modern methods and modern libraries and documentation. So I think O3 does, when it comes to like building, kind of having to build tools that use more modern libraries and APIs and documentation, that maybe O3 might be better, because it actually natively or intuitively just researches that and gets it back. Now you can tell Gemini to like actually look up the most recent ones, and it will do that. But because of O3's reasoning plus search abilities, where it can cycle back and forth, it may be a little better at finding you the ideal way to implement your solution if you're coding with these. And of course, Gemini is really good at coding, and so it can actually like build this whole thing, and it does it just fine. So the last example I want to show you, and this is a really cool one because it really highlights the multi-tool usage, multimodality, and the reasoning of O3. I asked it to find out how tourism from Canada to the USA is trending this year and compared to last year, and to graph it for me. And so it comes back with this graph here. It's like it shows me 2023, 2024, and then Jan 2024, Jan 2025. So it's comparing just January of both of this year and last year, and then like the full year of 23 and 24. And if you look at the thought sequences, again, it's kind of doing the same thing, where it's like figuring out what I'm trying to do, does some reasoning, does a bunch of searches, gets back numbers, does some more reasoning, tries to fill any gaps if it thinks there are gaps, and then comes back to me with the final answer. And it uses Python to visualize it as well with the bar chart. Now, I noticed it only gave me Jan, and we're in April right now. And so I asked it to plot the trend into Feb and March as well. And it did some more thinking, and I realized that it did not have actual official numbers for Feb and March, which is why it didn't plot it. So it kind of just like did a bunch of reasoning and searching, and got data from different sources, and sort of like pieced together what the estimate of the numbers would be. And it came out with some numbers, and it's plotted it here, Jan, Feb, March, and you can see the decline as well here from in tourism. And so then I said, can you forecast this to July 1st? So I wanted to see if it could continue to reason, look at the trend, and then use Python and more data to forecast this forward. And I actually did that. We'll have to see whether these numbers actually match up to what happens. And it turns out that we are going to be getting some new numbers on 23rd April. So I'm going to go back and see how these, as well as into the summer, I'm going to go back and see how this matches up. But it thought for like 4 minutes here, did a lot of reasoning, searching the web, pulling numbers together. Then it kind of like applied, sort of like looking at the trend from the first 3 months of the year. How does it go on into the summer? And you can see the reasoning here, like the answer of showing that there was kind of the dip because of the sort of the border issues and the tariff and all of that kind of stuff, the tariff tension. Canadians are like, not going to the USA because they want to, Canada first, and all of that's happening. So it kind of shows that decline, and then it kind of also makes assumptions of like, if the tariffs ease off, the decline could decrease. And then there's also kind of like the July, the long weekend where, there's a lot more travel happening that weekend, as well as currency swings and stuff. So really interesting to see it kind of reason through all of this, and give me like actual numbers here. And it's something that I can verify later, but I can see this being really useful for anyone working in any kind of field that deals with any kind of numbers. So like, finance, investing, policy making, insurance, trading, even if you're like not in a role that requires using a lot of numbers, like a marketer, for example, still uses numbers to like determine campaign efficiency and ad efficiency and all that. So I think this might be really useful to analyze numbers, forecast numbers, and so on. And even just do like really thorough research and get you specific numbers or estimates of numbers. Let's have a look at Gemini. And so same question again to Gemini. And here's the thinking here where it like goes through, figures it out, formulates the search queries, uses the Google search tool, gets the responses back. And like I said, again, it kind of like formulates the initial queries, does a Google search, gets all the results back, and then packages it up. So it doesn't do multiple rounds of reasoning and tool calling. But you can see that it does come out with the chart here and shows kind of like this, January and March. So I don't know what happened to Feb. I did specifically say so far this year, but maybe it just skipped Feb. But it's got January. It has got March. So I think it did find some number somewhere for March, and it gave me the results here. It's saying a 26.7% decline from last year, and okay, so yeah, it did not find February decline. So O3 did not find numbers of Feb and March, but sort of calculated and figured it out eventually. Gemini, because it just does one search and gets responses back and shows it to you, it didn't find the numbers there for Feb. It found some numbers somewhere for March, and so it plotted that. And so it shows the overall trend here. And then I asked it to forecast this until July 1st, and it could not do that. So it did say that it's going to be sort of declining even further, and there seems to be weaker forward bookings and negative traveler sentiment and so on. But it says also it cannot give me a precise forecast. So sadly, Gemini failed on this one, while O3 did really well. So really excited to be trying out O3. It came out yesterday, so I'm going to have to dig further, especially where I use a lot of like the reasoning tools for coding. And I have a video on how to like code with AI models. But the first thing I do when I'm coding a new project or building something new is to use a reasoning model to think through the project. And so I'd be excited to see how O3 does that and whether it's better than Gemini in figuring this stuff out. But when it comes to other stuff like kind of doing research, analysis, image manipulation, I think O3 is definitely the top model for that right now.